Here is Van Dieman's Azure Kingfisher. This is a blue with a gold shimmer. I was looking forward to this ink from the moment I saw the sample, then the swatch, and I went, wow. There is a ton of tone shift as paper changed, and it shades and the gold shimmer managed to always come through, though at times a bit less. On non-fountain pen friend on non-fountain, oh my lord, I'm going to leave this in so you can hear how tough this is sometimes. On non-fountain pen friendly paper, it performs exceedingly well with no feathering and no aggression, never getting too deep into the paper. I normally wouldn't suggest a shimmer to a student note taker. This one is different. It looks so good. Maybe a student note taker should use it to really dress up some boring math notes. Yes, I would love a bottle of this ink.
The pen for today is a Lamy All-Star. So now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how we got there by looking at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
While I don't think I'm going to get it to show on camera especially well, the shimmer really does come through in all of this writing. This doesn't feather, doesn't spread. It has decent enough shading. You see it in integers where the T and the G are a little light or darker than the rest of the word, but the shimmer really with this blue are an excellent match. Incredibly well done. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
Van Dieman's makes more than just this one ink. So let's take a look at a few other inks from Van Dieman's.
Here is Van Dieman's Pink Radish. Here is Van Dieman's Golden Nugget Pumpkin. Here is Van Dieman's Apple Cider.
The second writing sample is done in a Portage Reporter notebook.
Here the blue is just a little bit darker than it is on the Clairfontaine. That shimmer still manages to come through very well on this paper. As I turn it, I see it especially in the top line. I see it on the knot, the this, the section, it's all over the place. The shimmer is doing an excellent job. It doesn't feather, it doesn't spread. It does offer just the tiniest bit of shading, but it is there. The shading might be lost as a result of this being a more absorbent paper. This looks so good. Does that shimmer smudge at all? No, I'm not getting it to smudge. It's a more absorbent paper, really helping out with that. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
There's a lot to be learned by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down to immediately put into water to show the separation of those colors, making the ink. Now the one on the right is marked with a D. This is allowed to dry for 10 minutes before it's put into water. The third writing sample is done in a national brand Steno notebook.
Here the tone is a bit darker than it is on the Clairfontaine. The darker tone makes me think that this is an opaque ink, not being affected by the tone of the paper, but the makeup of the paper. That has to do with what we saw with the Portage just before. Now, it does manage to shimmer. It shimmers where it shades, and that's the only spots that this paper really held on to it. So while we have no feather and no spread, in like the darker H of that, I can see shimmer. In the darker T's of little, I can see shimmer. But in where power is mostly light, I don't see any. The more absorbent paper is gobbling it up. Looking at the back of the page, we get no real problem for ghosting. We don't get any bleeding, but we do get spots that are a little deeper into the paper. Not a huge problem, but it is definitely there. It might be enough to stop people from writing on the back.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Now, the smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. In the upper left, you can see where there is highlighter. In the upper right, that is pen flush. The lower left has a 1/3 bleach solution, and the lower right has plain old water. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook.
Here we actually get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. Now, I know immediately it looks like it's a little bit darker. It does not show the shimmer as frequently, which might not be on the ink, might just be on how the shimmer is getting used up from the pen. It doesn't feather, doesn't spread. It does shade just as well as it does on the Clairfontaine, which isn't huge in what's happening. Look at if then on the second line. The if is in general lighter than the then. it stands out against a quad rule with no problems at all, making it good for use on quad rule paper. Looking at the back of the page, no bleeding and no ghosting.
With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at a few more blue inks that are out there.
Here is Diatramentis Giuseppe Verde Dark Blue. Here is Geherban Blue Ocean. Here is Levenger Skies of Blue. Here is Mont Blanc Permanent Blue.
All of the inks that you just saw have a review here on the channel. Now, the next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook.
Here the tone is a little bit, just a hair darker than it is on the Clairfontaine. As an in general tone that we're seeing on the page, it doesn't feather, it doesn't spread, it is not showing any of the shimmer on this paper. It does have a little bit of feathering that show, or a little bit of not feathering, of shading that shows up like you see in length. The TH is slightly darker. I think while this works well on this paper, for a student, if they're using this paper, they're really missing out on a beautiful shimmering ink. Looking at the back of the page, no bleeding and no ghosting.
While it's nice to see inks that are in the same color family, I prefer to find inks that complement the color on the page.
Here is Graf von Faber-Castell Electric Pink. Here is Robert Oster Orange Zest. Here is Sailor Granat. Here is Califolio Ochre Juan.
The best way you can support this or any channel that you like watching is to alert the retailer of where you saw the product at time of purchase. Now, the last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
Here the tone is the same as the tone that is underneath the shimmer on the Clairfontaine. Now, there is the possibility of spotting some feathers, like possibility here. It's not out of the question. So there is a tiny bit of feathering that can occur. The spread that occurs here is fairly normal for on copy paper. It is showing a little bit of shimmer that shows up. It's not that it's nothing. It is there just occasionally and not in any kind of regular way. Only a little bit, less than sensible in what's happening. There are moments of shading. The shading is not what brings on the feathering or what brings on the shimmer, though we do see the feathering a little. Yeah, we're going to move. Looking at the back of the page, we have no ghosting. We have nothing that bleeds through the page underneath. In fact, while there are spots where it gets a little bit more aggressive, it is not anywhere near as frequent as most other inks. This could be a decent ink for writing on the back of copy paper.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
The medium flow fine nib of the Lamy All-Star gives a nice blue with some shading and a healthy dose of some gold shimmer. Very healthy. Off camera, I tried this in a wet fine, and what I got was all shimmer all the time. Just too much shimmer in that kind of case. If you love it for the shimmer, then that's going to be great. I love the shimmer adding to what's going on there. So I say go for a medium flow pen, any standard nib size, to get the blue and the shading and the shimmer all working well to support each other, making your writing look even better.